threatening that we would leave without a deal. Because if that is the extent of his plan, it is not very well thought through. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Could she confirm, if there was a general election, that Liberal Democrats will be putting in their manifesto a pledge to revoke Article 50?
It's of no surprise to the Honourable Lady that the Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. We have been crystal clear on stopping Brexit, and for all there are different views on different sides of the House about that, I don't think anyone can accuse us of not being straightforward about where we stand. In terms of the negotiation, the Prime Minister says, I've already given way. The terms of the negotiation, the Prime Minister says that he now can't do this negotiation because we are taking no deal off the table. But we know there are not serious negotiations anyway. The word disingenuous was used by the Father of the House, and I think it is accurate. The Prime Minister has wanted the job that he has for so long, it has been almost painful to watch. He has been prepared to say anything and do anything to get that job. And he said, I've given way, he has said, we will get a great deal. Well, now he has the job. That is the job. Go and get a great deal. But he knows that he was just saying whatever came into his head to get the job. He knows he cannot get the great deal because there is no such thing as a great Brexit deal, and he is scared of being found out. I've already given way to somebody on his benches. I'm going to say what I have to say. The way I think this is best resolved is by putting this issue to the people in a people's vote, to decide on the Brexit way forward, because I do not believe there is a majority in this country for any specific type of Brexit deal. I'm not even convinced there's a majority in the Conservative Party for any type of Brexit deal. But we could have a general election, and I say to the Prime Minister, such an election should be held in a responsible, calm and orderly way, not with the threat of crashing out with no deal either during the campaign or in the immediate aftermath. So if he wants an election, extend Article 50 for the purposes of having a general election and bring it on. And if he's not prepared to do that, don't be surprised when people are not fooled by his tactics and vote against him.
Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, there is one purpose in denying this motion tonight, and that is to ensure that the British people have no say whatever over what takes place at the European Council on the 17th of October. Isn't it?
Anna Soubry.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important that in this debate we are all very mindful of the language that we use. And it has been concerning that honourable and right honourable members opposite, including our Prime Minister, has chosen to use the word frit and frightened of those of us who believe that the last thing that this country needs is a general election. Given everything that has happened in the last few years, there are a number of people in this place of whom they could not be accused of being frightened. In fact, it's taken a lot of courage for some people. And if honourable members opposite aren't familiar with courage, they might want to talk to some of those honourable members who they've just booted out of their own party. Decent, long-serving, hugely loyal members of the Conservative Party who last night and again today chose to put their constituents and their country first. And the price that they have paid is to see the end of their parliamentary career. And this House is right, Mr. Speaker, to commend each and every one of them for the considerable courage that they took. Mr. Speaker, I am in no doubt whatsoever that it's not just the people of Broxtowe, but the people of this country who are thoroughly fed up to the back teeth with Brexit. I don't doubt that. And that is why I am of the very firm view that the matter of Brexit must be brought to a conclusion. There are people in this place who will know in the many cross-party conversations that we have had, and I am proud that we have worked together across parties, putting aside our normal differences, again in the country's interest. That my view was that any extension should not go beyond certainly January, maybe February of next year, because of the profound need that we must bring this matter, as I say, to a conclusion. And that is one of the reasons why I will give way one moment. That is one of the reasons why I don't believe a general election is the answer at all, because it will not solve the Brexit crisis. And of course I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Honourable Lady for giving way. The second part of the bill that she just approved actually handed power to the EU to dictate whatever extension they wanted. That is what they said.
No, we have read.
I'm so sorry to tell the Honourable Lady, but she's obviously been reading something completely different to the rest of us, because it most absolutely does not. This bill has been carefully drafted, and properly so, to make sure that it is in the interests of our country that we take no deal off the table, because that's the best thing for this country. That bill, and I'm quite happy to take an intervention rather than her just shouting at me. That bill is all about not stopping Brexit, as many of us would like to do, but it's about stopping no deal for all the reasons that have been explained. I'll quickly give way.
Will she agree with me that actually a no-deal Brexit is no way out of this Brexit conundrum? It will follow years and years of difficulties, and it is dishonest, it is not right to say that actually a no-deal Brexit will solve the Brexit issue.
The Honourable Lady is right, and not only is she right about no deal, she's also right that the former Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement also would not have ended the debate about Brexit, because it was a blindfolded Brexit that did not determine our future trading relationship with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, my views on this are well known. I believe the only way out of the crisis is to have now a people's vote. Put that deal that the former Prime Minister, well, it wasn't a deal, but at least it was something, put that to the British people with Remain on the ballot paper, and let's get this matter over. I believe the British people have also changed their minds. I think they are now seeing Brexit for what it is, and I think given the opportunity they would vote for the best deal, and that's the current deal that we have with the European Union. That's another good reason why this matter must now go back to the British people by way of a people's vote.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Rise only briefly, because I know we want to get through this, but in response to this, the reality about this tonight is this is about a general election. And what we've had is speeches from a number of people on the opposite benches, which are all about nothing to do with the general election, all about recycling the debate that we had earlier. The truth is, there is but a simple question in front of the opposition parties. Only 2 days ago, they were crying out for an election. The shadow Chancellor said, "Bring it on, we're ready for it." The leader of the opposition, when he wasn't having his afternoon nap and awake enough to be able to meet the media, said he wanted to have an election. The Scottish nationalists were adamant that they were going to vote for an election. And the reality... No, wait a minute. The honourable gentleman's made a fool of himself already. He should stay put. I'm doing him a favour. What I can say, I am really doing him a favour. He may not understand it. But the reality right now, Mr. Speaker, as we are in this debate, the question therefore is, if they don't vote for an election tonight, if they refuse to vote to have that election, then they are running away from what is their democratic responsibility. I say to those like the Honourable Lady, one time my honourable friend, no, honestly, he really doesn't want to do himself any disfavour any longer. I say to the Honourable Lady that was up earlier that she talks about a people's vote. The problem with a people's vote, if she wants to put it to a referendum, as the new leader of the Liberal Party said, she would never accept the result if, wait a minute, if they said they wanted to leave, they would not accept the result. Now, wait a minute. No. Let me finish this, because it's important. So here's the fault line. Without a different parliament, a new referendum will change absolutely nothing if it votes to leave again, because we'll come back to this parliament and all that will happen is they will stop, delay and try and defeat that motion. So the decision tonight is the only decision that can be made in all reality, which is if you want to decide whether the British people were right to vote leave or wrong, put it to them in a general election and let them now make that decision. And I see the honourable gentleman opposite shaking his head simply because only days ago he and his colleague on the front bench...
Give order, Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, but the right honourable gentleman said something about me which is simply not accurate. And I asked if I could intervene. He didn't allow me, which I accept is his absolute right. But I think the record should record I have always said this matter goes back to the British people and they vote for Mrs May's deal, sorry, the former Prime Minister's deal, or some new magical unicorn deal. As far as I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, that's the end of it.
I'm going to bring this conclusion, Mr. Speaker. I say to my honourable friend, if she wants a people's vote, the people's vote is in front of us tonight in this debate. It is called a general election. I have never seen a moment when an opposition party does not want to take over. This is a bizarre affair when they're running away from actually trying to defeat a government. Let's have that election. No. Let us have that election. Let us make that decision. And if the right honourable gentleman who leads the Labour Party right now genuinely believes in democracy, put up or shut up.
Yes, Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, I very much wish to talk about a general election, as the right honourable gentleman before me has criticised others for not doing so. I want to, I suppose, speak really, really plainly and say that tonight I will absolutely vote against a general election, just like I would vote against pretty much anything the current Prime Minister put in front of me, because I have I'm going to warn, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not cracking on the old parliamentary, the protocols and everything, and I fear I may say some things that are unparliamentary. Please feel free to alert me to them. I have absolutely no faith in anything that the current Prime Minister says. Literally none. I wouldn't trust him. Am I allowed to say that? I wouldn't trust him. As well, I mean, there's literally no distance that I could trust him. No, so yes, members on the other side say so. Stand in an election. I have absolutely no fear that I would hold my seat in an election. Absolutely none whatsoever. However, the Prime Minister does not. The Prime Minister that we have at the moment is playing some bully boy game of some bully boy public school that I probably won't understand any more than I understand parliamentary procedures. And I am absolutely... Sorry, would the honourable gentleman like to make an intervention? Crack on.
Order. The honourable lady says that she doesn't understand parliamentary procedure, but on the whole she doesn't shriek from a sedentary position. The honourable gentleman has been in this House for 14 years. If he wishes to contribute, he can seek to catch my eye. He shouldn't chunter from a sedentary position in evident disregard for the procedures of the House.
Just shouting at women over there, John.
So the reality is that what we have here is a game where we're not being told what the rules are. The Prime Minister could bring a deal to this House. He could tell us what his plans are for Northern Ireland. He could tell us what his plans are for trade. And I will give way in one moment. And he could... Yesterday, I watched Conservative colleagues begging him to tell them what he wanted. Begging him. Yeah, churra a bit, Bab. I saw colleagues begging him to say, give us a deal to vote for. Yeah. This is not... The Prime Minister has stood in front and said, I don't want an election, I don't want an election. This is some game that three men in Parliament, in number 10 Downing Street, have come up with to try and game the system so that they win. The people in my democratic responsibility is to try and do the absolute best for the people in my constituency. And at the moment, it's not all that clear. We're all a little bit confused. But I am absolutely not going to use them as a chitty in a game for the Prime Minister to achieve the ambition that he has only ever had for himself and never for this country. I am not going to use my constituents as collateral damage. I will give way.
Lady, for giving way. It's clear. And one of the things that people watching this should be aware of is that we all know in here they want a cut-and-run election. The election they don't want is the 14th or the 21st of November. That's the election that we'll take them out on.
I absolutely agree, and I will not personally, I will not vote for any election that falls before the 31st of October. I absolutely will.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I also will not be voting for a general election today because I do not want in any way for a no deal in this country, because it will not only harm my constituents, it will harm the 22,000 EU nationals who are living in my constituency. We have in this country the Home Secretary saying that the freedom of movement will end at midnight on the 31st of October, which means that my EU citizen...
I couldn't agree with my honourable lady more. There are thousands of EU migrants in my constituency, and lots of them have absolutely no idea what the situation is going to be for them. I have to represent those people as much as I represent the people who would be allowed to vote in a general election or allowed to vote in a referendum. Go on.
Grateful for the honourable lady giving way. Isn't the truth that both her and many of her colleagues don't want a general election because they're as scared as we are of the Leader of the Opposition becoming Prime Minister?
I'm more than happy. Let's make no bones about the fact that I am not able to be completely critical when I think things are wrong, both in my party and in your the governing party. It's just a shame that quite a lot of the people who are sat in front of me, who know what has happened over the last 2 days is wrong, are too cowardly to actually say to me in here, in public, what they're all saying in the tea rooms. You know what has happened over here. Getting rid... It's as if we were kicking out Harriet Harman. That is what it feels like. It is an abomination the way your party has behaved. Absolutely. You've all crowed and given sympathy to me about the problems that we have in the Labour Party, and you've just sat by silently while your colleagues have been marched out.
You're giving way. Very well. Yes. Indeed.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. And the point she makes about the fact that how the party on that side has treated its very loyal members of Parliament, whatever else might have said, I think it's unheard of in parliamentary history that an MP who's voted against his party to have the whip suspended. That is a bully boy tactic.
I'm going to round up my comments. I agree entirely. I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, although there's plenty of Brendas in Birmingham. And I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, and the reason that I don't think that we should have a general election and the reason I won't vote for it is because I think, actually, we shouldn't go on conference recess. We shouldn't be proroguing Parliament. We are currently in a national crisis. This is not a game. This is not some toy that we can play with. The British public think that we should... I'm not going to give way anymore. I apologise. I have given way plenty of time. The British public, if you were to go out into the street and ask them, they think that we should be in here doing our jobs. They think that we're away from here too often anyway. I am appalled by the prorogation, and from now on, let's call it shutting down of Parliament, because I literally hate the word prorogation, and the people outside probably don't understand what we're talking about half the time. The shutting down of Parliament has essentially killed a bill that I have worked on for 2.5 years, something that people in this House have deeply held feelings on, and I'm meant to believe that the Prime Minister is really doing this because he has a vision for the people in this country. He has a vision that comes to him every night, and it is his own face. I will vote against an election until the end of October, until this is sorted, because the British public want me here working for them, and that is what I will do.
Nigel Evans.
Speaker, well, no doubt her constituents do want her working here and representing her. And she talked about this being a national crisis, and it is a national crisis, but it's a crisis of trust. It's a crisis of trust in politicians. It's a crisis of trust in democracy as well, because it was this House that decided to give the British public the referendum in 2016, and I know the expectation was that the British public would not vote to leave the European Union, but when they listened to all the arguments, they decided that they wished to leave. Following that, we had a general election. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party both stood on a similar platform on Brexit, and that was that we were going to deliver the Brexit that people voted for. Now, I remember the ballot paper. It said, do you want to remain or leave the European Union? It was a basic binary question. And the fact is that 17.4 million people in this country decided that they wished to leave the European Union, and the margin was about 1.4 million. And the expectation, because of that pamphlet that David Cameron ensured got sent to all the households in the United Kingdom, and on the back of it, it said that we will deliver what the British people had voted for. That was in 2016. Today, we are September 2019. We should have left on March the 29th, but we didn't. Then we should have left on February the 12th, but we didn't. Then the then Prime Minister said, I cannot contemplate a date beyond June the 30th of us leaving. And we didn't. And now it's October the 31st. And we've just given a third reading to a bill that will extend that by another 3 months. Unless, of course, the European Union decide that they want it greater than 3 months, because then that is something that we will have to accept. Yes, I'll give way.
For giving away, but I mean, he can have his beliefs, but he can't have his own facts. The bill that we've passed tonight does absolutely nothing unless the Prime Minister fails to come back from the European Council with a deal. And if he comes back with a deal, we then vote on it on the 19th. If the House votes for that deal, we leave the European Union with that deal. If that deal doesn't pass this House, then this House has to vote on no deal. And if the House doesn't agree with no deal, that is when we go for the extension. Those are the facts about what we've done. It does nothing to the negotiations of the Prime Minister. That is a complete fallacy. And what is happening here is that this government is being run by Nigel Farage, and that is what's going on here.
The fact is, what this House did today, quite clearly, was to weaken the negotiating position of the Prime Minister. And we all know that Michel Barnier and the European Union listen very carefully to this Parliament, and in fact, they have a direct line, some MPs in this Parliament, to Michel Barnier and Juncker and Tusk. They're in fairly well daily contact with them sometimes. There's one over there. And we know what they're saying. They're saying, don't give in to the British Prime Minister because we can resist Brexit. And that's what's going to happen. We know that the British Prime Minister is already in discussions with people like Angela Merkel and various others within the European Union to ensure that the problems that existed in the old deal are removed. But by the bill that was passed tonight, it gives the European Union no incentive whatsoever to come to the negotiating table and to have a proper negotiation. And I've just come to the mind, and I know the Liberal Democrats are at least the honest party, as well as the Scottish Nationalists now, of saying that they do not wish to leave the European Union. And in fact, when we've had that referendum and the people have voted to leave, I just wonder which part of Liberal Democrat is actually Democrat. Because they clearly are not interested in what the British people voted for in 2016. They asked for a second vote, but what we're offering tonight is a general election, and that can be a second vote, because the people will look at the policies of the Labour Party under its current leader and look at the policies of my party under its current leader, and they will decide who of the two Prime Ministers, or the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, will go to Brussels and then have that negotiation on October the 17th. But part of the problem, Mr. Speaker, and we all know it, is that during the 2016 referendum, 3/4 of this chamber voted to remain in the European Union. They do not want to leave the European Union, and they will do anything that they possibly can to frustrate us from leaving the European Union. Yes, of course I will.
I think it'd be more accurate and kinder to have had a full stop and a pause after saying who voted which way in the referendum, before going on to suggest that those who voted one way have been voting the same way during the debate on leaving the European Union. I voted 3 times to leave the European Union. I wish the same thing could be said about some of the zealots on my side.
Well, the fact is that we now have a Prime Minister who believes in the mission, who wants to negotiate honestly with the European Union and be able to deliver the Brexit that people really voted for, which is to leave the customs union, leave the single market, not pay in vast sums of money to the European Union as we currently do, to control our own immigration and not to be just decidable by the European courts, and certainly not to have a backstop that keeps us in the European Union without our permission of ever having to leave. What I would say, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is, as I said, 3/4 of this Parliament voted to remain in the European Union, and the vast majority of those still do not wish us to leave. And the fact is this: the British people have voted to leave the European Union, and if this Parliament decides that we are not going to leave the European Union, then the British people ought to have the opportunity to change its Parliament, and they can do that tonight.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This attempt to dissolve Parliament is a desperate and utterly cynical move, and I am delighted that tonight it's been made very, very clear by all of the opposition parties that we are not falling for it. The Prime Minister can own his own horrendous mess, because he is trying to smuggle out this no-deal Brexit during an election campaign. And that's what makes it so vital that no election happens before there is an extension of Article 50, before it's agreed, and crucially before it's implemented as well. Now, I notice that the Prime Minister has himself scuttled off. He can't even be bothered to listen to the debate on his own motion on something as important as a general election. But let me say that there are numerous reasons why many of us want to get rid of this cruel and callous government. And believe me, I am one of those who absolutely wants to do that, not least because this is a government, for example, which is not only not doing anywhere near enough to tackle the climate crisis, they are actively exacerbating it with fracking, with fossil fuel subsidies and so on. But this is also a government that has the arrogance to claim that the so-called bumps in the road, that the no-deal Brexit is going to be just bumps in the road. How dare they? They might be bumps in the road to a front bench who has the luxury to be insulated from the impacts of that disastrous no-deal Brexit. But for most of our constituents, a no-deal Brexit spells real disaster, and it is not bumps in the road, and the mere fact that they could use that phrase suggests just how out of touch they are with their own constituents. But a general election on the Prime Minister's terms right now is a trap. It will not resolve the Brexit crisis. Elections are very rarely fought on one issue alone. and first past the post is notoriously bad at reflecting the true views of the public in the seats that are then won. If we are to break the Brexit deadlock in Parliament, then the people must lead the way. Now, the Prime Minister regularly asserts his commitment to the will of the people, so why is he not prepared to listen to what the people want now, specifically on Brexit, go back to them in a second referendum, in a people's vote? That is how we resolve Brexit, not by proroguing and dissolving and dodging and obfuscating. Now, I want to make one more important point, which is about how the people of our country have been let down by successive governments. The status quo is intolerable for huge numbers of people in our country. Brexit laid bare the extent to which our governance structures are derelict. The social contract is broken, the power game is rigged. The 17.4 million people who gave the establishment such a well-deserved kicking in 2016 were right and reasonable to be furious, because we need a powerful commitment now, not even to try to go back to the way things were before 2016. But that means tackling democratic failure as well as economic failure. It means redistributing power as well as wealth. So if the government were genuine about being on the side of the people, they'd be honest enough to own the complete chaos that they've managed to create. They would put country before party and back a citizens' convention to revitalise our democracy, and explore proposals like a codified written constitution, a fairer voting system so that people's views are properly heard. Let's at last have a democracy that puts people at the heart of it. And they would also finally provide a categorical assurance that they will respect this House and the democracy that we do have, and not seek to avoid it in any way, and not try to avoid implementing the bill that we have just voted on tonight.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think every honourable and right honourable member in this House respects the passion and bravery of the Honourable Lady for Brighton Pavilion, but will she at least recognise the irony that she's calling for the revitalisation of democracy at the same time as she's voting against renewing the representative mandate of this House? And I would just invite this House to consider, I'm going to be very brief, I would just invite this House, and the irony also extends to those crying for a people's vote who are now going to vote against the people having a vote about the future of this House. The British public have watched this House of Commons decline into an almost zombie parliament, a parliament that's incapable of deciding anything, and a parliament which is still dominated by Remain thinking and Remain attitudes, even though the British people clearly voted leave in the referendum. Yesterday, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I spoke about the problem of us having created conflicting representative and direct mandates, that the legitimacy of this House was unquestionably as a House of Representatives, but we qualified that as we introduced the concept of referendums into our Constitution, and the representative mandate is unalterably qualified by the fact that we've had a referendum and we said we would implement the result of that referendum, and this House has failed to do so. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how is this going to be resolved? It's not going to be resolved by continuing to put off decisions. And yet the bill, which so many of the Remain supporting members of this House are so pleased with, does no more than invite the European Union to put off the decisions. What is going to be gained by putting off the decisions again? And what is going to be, and what kind of respect will this House gain by putting off the decisions at the same time as avoiding the accountability that a general election would give to our electors, to make us accountable for what we are responsible for? I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Does my honourable friend share my puzzlement that opposition benches are looking at a government that has lost its majority, that cannot get its business through, that is offering the chance of a general election, which will be about more than just Brexit. There are other things that matter to my constituents, and that they will still want to renew a mandate and give a government a mandate to deliver on those things. And that with a government without the ability to deliver needs to have a general election. And I would have thought anybody opposite would have said that.
I share agreement with much of what my honourable friend says. But then I return to this question: how is it going to be resolved? Because when supposing the opposition is successful and the bill goes through, and the Prime Minister is obliged to go and seek an extension and to accept an extension, and we get an extension to, say, the 31st of January or whatever date the European Union decides to offer. I'm not going to give way. What will happen after that? I mean, there is a definition of madness, which is to repeat the same thing again and again and accept a different outcome. And the longer this goes on, the more members of Parliament in this House will fear holding a general election, because out there, then the faith in the established political parties, I'm not going to give away this, the voters' faith in the establishment political parties is not being improved by what's going on, it's being further undermined. And the last thing I wanted was the whole of British politics to be realigned around the question of Brexit. But that's what's going to happen the longer we carry on putting off this decision. And I long, like so many of my voters and so many colleagues in this House, to move on to the questions beyond Brexit, but that requires us to respect the decision that has been taken. And it requires respecting the fact that there's a government in office with the responsibility to conduct the negotiations as it sees fit, or it requires those who do not have confidence in that government to put down a motion of confidence and resolve that question. And this brings me again, Mr. Speaker, back to the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which is what the resolution that we are debating this evening arises from the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. And this has been turned out to be a recipe for this paralysis. This paralysis would never have arisen but for the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act. I beg your pardon, I hear the honourable gentleman from the north east of England, I forget his constituents, North Durham, saying, well, you voted for it, he says, accusingly at me. I certainly did not vote for it. And I remember, and I put on record in this House, I remember walking through the No lobby with remarkably few people against the second reading of that vote, and that bill, and I said to them, don't worry, this House will rue the day that it passed this piece of legislation, and we should now be rueing the day, because that piece of legislation has put this House in the position where it can endlessly wound a government but can avoid killing it. And we now have, if the Leader of the Opposition has so much contempt for the way this government is conducting its affairs, and this government no longer has a majority, why don't they put down a motion of confidence? It's because there is fear in this House about facing the consequences of a general election because of the way this House has conducted the whole Brexit affair for the last 3 years.
Yep, that's right.
And when I ask how is this going to be resolved, I can tell you this: putting it off again and again isn't going to make the political outcome of the eventual general election any easier for a great many colleagues in this House. And my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in his inimitable style, is showing leadership and courage at last. He is trying to resolve this issue. Leave and remain were the words on the ballot paper. There wasn't any reference to a deal or no deal. And there was no reference to a deal or no deal, but the Prime Minister of the day made it quite clear that we would leave the European Union, and this House has conspired again and again to delay that happening. People in their constituencies, people particularly in Remain voting constituencies, should ask themselves, What mandate do they have for putting off this decision again and again? And it's democracy in our country that is paying the price, and it's the rise of far more extremist parties that will be the result if this House carries on putting off the decision.
Thelma Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm relatively new to this place, but when I was elected as Member of Parliament for Colne Valley, one of the few things I had to get used to was being addressed as Honourable Lady, and when addressing male colleagues as Honourable Gentleman. It seemed strange and really arcane. Yet recently I've been considering what it means to be honourable and realise that it's indeed appropriate to consider what makes a person truly honourable. And it's a pity the Prime Minister is not in his place. Would the Prime Minister be able to confirm that the people of this country consider the government's recent behaviour to be honourable? It's clear many people outside Westminster think not. Furthermore, I've been reflecting on my years as a teacher and head teacher and considering how hard I worked, as do all teaching professionals, to instil the right values and ethos throughout a school, such as respect, honesty and integrity. I'll make progress. Integrity, I used to explain to younger children, was doing the right thing even when someone isn't watching. Well, we're watching the Prime Minister, and I fear if there's an attempt to get away with no deal, with no mandate, and trying to gag Parliament whilst we're watching, what other horrors are going on behind closed doors? Could the Prime Minister tell me if he believes his Cabinet has the integrity required to run our country, especially when some are lying flat out along the front bench? I remember some time back being invited to a meeting with one of the government ministers to discuss a local constituency matter. He said, the chamber is just theatre and the real work goes on in meetings like this. That stayed with me, Mr. Speaker. It really did. As I know that this place is not theatre to me, and when I speak, it's from the heart. And I speak for my people in Colne Valley and those that are suffering under this government's cruel and callous austerity. Yes, I want a general election so that we have a government which acts with both honour and integrity and respects the business in this chamber. However, I want that election on the opposition's terms and when there's no possible chance of a no-deal Brexit. The history books will show that this current government acted with neither honour nor integrity and made us the laughingstock of the world. Our country deserves far better.
John Barron.
Speaker, I stand briefly to raise one simple point, and it's an inconvenient truth for many in this chamber, and that is the overwhelming majority of members here tonight voted to trigger Article 50. And what Article 50 said, very simply, is that we would leave the EU by the 29th of March with or without a deal. And yet we have now seen 2 extensions to that deadline. And to many outside this place, it is evident proof that there are too many Remain MPs in this place who will clasp onto any straw that is passing in order to delay and frustrate the EU referendum result. And that is wrong. It is very wrong indeed. Not only does it make for a lack of trust, but actually it's reinforcing a scepticism in our politics, Mr. Speaker, which is not healthy at all. And we've had straws, I will in a minute, but I'll just finish this point. We've had straws in the wind clasped such as the people need another vote. Or we need to support this ridiculous motion, which quite literally anybody who has negotiated will understand. If you signal to this other side of the table you're not prepared to walk away, it makes for a worse deal. That is a fact. But not to many members here who will clasp at any straw to try and frustrate Brexit. And I'll give you one other example, Mr. Speaker, of how Brexit is being frustrated in this place, because there is a near hysteria about no deal, despite the fact that actually the UK, we trade with the majority of the world's GDP, many countries outside the EU on no-deal WTO terms. 5 of the EU's own top 10 trading partners trade on the basis of WTO no deal. And since Project Fear in 2016 failed, what we've had since is record low unemployment, record manufacturing output, and record investment and record investment. In fact, last year we had more inward investment than France and Germany put together, all in the full knowledge that we could be leaving on no-deal WTO terms. Now, despite all that, we've had members in this place who have clasped, too many Remain MPs who've clasped at these straws in order to frustrate Brexit and disregard the EU referendum result. That must now end. People have lost their patience with this place. The time has come, actually, to put actions instead of words. And I will give way to the honourable gentleman over there who stood first.
Well, I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. My simple point was this. I voted to trigger Article 50, but the then Prime Minister called a general election where I set down red lines to my constituents about what kind of deal I would get and vote for. And the Prime Minister lost that election effectively by losing 40-odd seats. So the honourable gentleman, my mandate comes from the 2017 election.
Actually, that's not a very fair point, for the very simple reason that both the Labour manifesto in that general election and the Conservative manifesto promised to deliver Brexit. And all we've seen since is utter delay and confusion, caused largely by Remain MPs who will not honour that referendum result. So at the end of the day, at the end of... Oh, go on, I will give way, go on.
The honourable gentleman keeps saying that this is a Remain Parliament with Remain MPs. He keeps throwing that around, but the House of Commons Library confirmed that in excess of 575 MPs in this House have voted for Brexit and voted for leave. How does he say that they are Remain MPs when they are voting to leave the European Union?
For a very simple reason, because the House has consistently voted not to honour the triggering of Article 50. We've kept kicking it into the long grass. When he voted, and I voted, to trigger Article 50, it was a very simple, short bill. It said we will leave by the 29th of March with or without a deal. Now, you've had your chance. You've had your chance. With or without a deal. But what have too many members done in this place is continue to kick the can down the road, not once, not twice, but now 3 times, courtesy of this bill, or the bill preceding the business tonight. It is absolutely ridiculous. People are utterly fed up with it. I think a lot of Remain MPs have got to look themselves in the mirror and say, actually, all I want to do, own up to the fact that all they want to do is stop Brexit. The people out there have had enough.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I am absolutely desperate to have a general election. I want to see a government which actually halts the privatisation of the National Health Service, which properly funds our public services, which stops the wealth of this country being squirreled away in tax havens in the Caribbean. I want to see a government that cares about the majority of the people in this country and not just about the very wealthy. But that is not why the Prime Minister is calling for a general election. The Prime Minister is not calling for a general election so that we can have a Labour government. The Prime Minister is calling for a general election so that when and if we were to vote for it, he would be in sole control of what happened in this country, and there would be no Parliament here to hold him to account when we leave with a no-deal Brexit. Now, in my constituency of Ipswich, more than 50% of the voters who voted in the referendum voted to leave. It wasn't very much more than 50%, but it was more than 50%. I would not vote for a straight vote to revoke Article 50 because I think that would be wrong. After there has been a referendum and people have voted, albeit by a narrow margin, to leave the European Union, I think it would be entirely wrong for this House to then simply go against those wishes. I want to see a viable deal that would not destroy the economy of this country, being agreed by this Parliament, so that when we have a second vote, when we have a people's vote or a second referendum or whatever you want to call it, which I think we have to have if we're going to bring the country back together again, I want there to be a viable choice. I do not believe that a no-deal Brexit is a viable choice. I think a no-deal Brexit is a suicide note. And if anybody on the opposite benches thinks that as passengers in a speeding car, speeding towards a cliff edge, we are going to take the option of jumping out just before you reach the cliff edge, then you've got another thing coming. Yes, we will have a general election. You will not survive for very much longer because you do not have an overall majority. But we are not going to have that general election while there is the danger of a no-deal Brexit.
Bob Seeley.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I find this a surreal debate in a zombie parliament. I've tried pinching myself to make sure that I'm awake. I was talking to the Honourable Member for Harlow and I said this isn't a dream, and he assured me it isn't. And I have one of my colleagues saying now, Bob, please make it go away. All I can say is, for people who are organising a coup, people who organise a coup generally don't put that coup to the people in the form of a vote. We want a people's vote. It's called a general election. The government is trying to get its agenda through. Because of the nature of this Parliament, it is not succeeding. Therefore, we need an election to ask the people what they are for, rather than simply their representatives to endlessly vote what they are against. I want an election because I want a government that delivers Brexit and then, frankly, gets on and governs. The Scottish Islands have the Scottish Islands Needs Allowance. I want something similar for my Isle of Wight. I was talking about it to the Prime Minister in the tea room today. He's keen to give it to us. I want it to cover the NHS, an extra 10 million in revenue. I want it to cover local government. I want it to cover DEFRA and housing. We can't get that because for 6 months we haven't had a domestic agenda because we have become monomaniacally obsessed by Brexit. I don't know what the parties opposite want, Mr. Speaker. 3 times they have been offered a Brexit deal. 3 times they have refused. Tonight they are being offered a general election, and tonight they are refusing. They cling to a zombie parliament for fear of what will happen when they go to the people. We need a new parliament, Mr. Speaker, because we need a government with a mandate in a parliament that votes for something positive. From now on, a collection of opposition MPs should be known, frankly, Mr. Speaker, as a shambles, because we offer leadership. What they offer, God knows. Thank you.
Yeah. Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr.
I beg your pardon. Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the Prime Minister has put to us is clearly a poisoned chalice. He is like the schoolroom clown who thinks that he can offer something to us, dancing around, blabbling from the dispatch box, but we know who he is. He is a man who has been twice sacked for lying. He clearly is a person that we cannot trust, and we therefore...
Order. The honourable gentleman is referring to parts of a member's career. I don't think he's making any allegation on us, and sincerely hope he isn't, about... if you'll let me finish. I hope he isn't making any allegation about the conduct of a member in this chamber, and he isn't, and therefore he is not out of order. But he's not out of order. I know the rules, and I know how to interpret them. I don't require any guidance from anybody on that matter. I'm very clear about that. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is there is much to be said for moderation in the use of parliamentary language, and as somebody who likes the honourable gentleman, I would urge him to be a little more courteous. Lloyd Russell Moyle.
I will correct myself and say he was allegedly sacked for lying twice, and the public...
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Aye. Division, clear the lobby. Order. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Tom Brake and Jonathan Edwards.
Pause.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 56.
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 56. So the ayes have it, but the House will be aware that the motion has not obtained the majority required under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011. Unlock. Yes, oh, very good. Well done. Yes, yes, indeed. Point of order, the Prime Minister. We're grateful.
Thank you very much for your kindness. I note that the Leader of the Opposition is once again not in his place in what I think is a slightly symbolic way. Mr. Speaker, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of "Stop the coup, let the people vote." Now he's saying, "Stop the election and stop the people from voting." I think there's only one solution. I think he has become the first, to my knowledge, the first leader of the opposition in the democratic history of our country to refuse the invitation to an election, Mr. Speaker. I can only speculate. I can only speculate as to the reasons behind his hesitation, Mr. Speaker. The obvious conclusion is, I'm afraid, that he does not think he will win. I urge his colleagues to reflect on what I think is the unsustainability of this position overnight and in the course of the next few days.
Thank you. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the... very well. Point of order, Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Speaker, is there some way of tabling a motion that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's opposition?
Well, I'm dealing with one point at a time. One has to proceed in an orderly manner in these matters. I say to the Prime Minister, I'm dealing with one point of order, and when I've dealt with it, I shall happily attend to another. It is evident from the smile on the face of the honourable gentleman that he is very pleased with the point that he has made. Point of order, Mr. Boris Johnson, the Prime
Minister. Speaker, I was just going to elaborate by saying this is the first time in history that the opposition has voted to show confidence in Her Majesty's government.
Thank you. Thank you. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Animal Welfare Sentencing Bill not amended in the Public Bill Committee to be considered.
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. Motion number 5 on selection. And whip to move. Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, most other appears say aye. Have the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Petition. Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present this petition on behalf of the community of Hollingwood Primary.
I think if members do not wish to listen to the Honourable Lady presenting her petition, it would be seemly to leave quickly and quietly in order that the Honourable Lady can present her petition heard and unimpeded. Petition, Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present this petition on behalf of the community of Hollingwood Primary School and the 343 parents, carers, staff and pupils who have signed it. They are seriously concerned about the impact that funding cuts are having on their school. I would like to state for the record what an excellent school Hollingwood is. I know from visiting the school that the head teacher and his staff are continuing to provide a quality education for all their pupils, but they are doing so, like many schools, in increasingly difficult circumstances. As the petition states, the school has seen a decline in funding per pupil of £297 and an overall reduction of £249,153 since 2015. This is having an impact on the ability of the school to provide a well-rounded education for all pupils. Several parents have written to me to say how much they value the extra support the school offers and their fear that this may not continue given the funding reductions. Many are concerned about the school's Busy Bees Nurture programme, which supports the well-being of vulnerable children. The school's nurture practitioner has written to me to express her concern and to tell me the value of the support that they provide. She recounted one young person returning to the school and recalling, "I have my family at home, but Busy Bees is my family at school." It is this sense of belonging and security which schemes like Nurture provide and which we cannot afford to lose. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges the Government to increase per pupil funding and reverse the cuts made to school budgets. And the petitioners remain, etc.